Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as I show you how to divide Autumn Joy sedum. So let's go. Spring is the most optimal time to divide any of your sedum. However, it is the end of July. It is optimal for me to divide this plant right now because I'm currently working on a project in this flower bed where I'm removing plants, moving around plants, and dividing plants. I figured it would be a great opportunity for me to just show you my process for dividing the sedum. There are a few ways you can propagate sedum. The easiest ways are either through division or through cuttings. At a later date, I'd be more than happy to make another video showing you how to propagate sedum using cuttings. Today's video, though, will just focus on how to divide the plant. Now, why would you want to divide a sedum plant? One reason would be because your sedum plant has become way too big. And when that happens, oftentimes in the center of the plant, it starts to die out. Also, another indicator is if the sedum plant is flopping over when it's blooming. Now, there are a few reasons why a large sedum plant might flop over. Because the plant has gotten too big and needs to be divided, that could be one reason. After all, sedum plants like to be divided every 3 to 5 years. Another reason why a sedum plant is flopping over is you've given it too much fertilizer. Maybe you gave it too much compost. They actually thrive in conditions that don't need a lot of organic material. And then a final reason why a sedum plant is flopping over is maybe it just rained really heavily and it was too much for that plant and therefore it just flopped over, which in most cases the plant will recover after the rainstorm has passed. This plant is not very old. It's not flopping over, but it's definitely in the back of this flower bed where it's a little bit shadier. I know that I didn't place it in the best location in this bed. So for today's video, we're just going to be digging it up. We're going to be dividing it. And then I'm going to show you my process for transplanting it back in the landscape. The good news, I was able to dig up and divide the sedum. The bad news, the mic wasn't turned on. Well, the great news is that I have a lot of sedum in another part of my yard that desperately needs to be dug up and divided. So I'm going to show you that process and then we will go ahead and transplant it into a different part of my yard. I'm just going to be using a shovel to dig up the sedum. When it comes to digging this plant, you want to make sure you don't dig right at the base of the plant because you don't want to damage any of the roots. So we're going to dig about 1 to 2 inches away from the base. I am a firm believer that things happen for a reason. Just by me going out into that weedy part of my yard, I was so thrilled to find so much of the sedum that I had placed out there. That area of my yard is actually pretty shady, and the sedum does not thrive in that section of my yard. However, in this bed, as well as some other beds that we've cleaned out recently, this sedum is going to do great. So I'm going to take you in for a closer look and show you my process for dividing the sedum. Keep in mind, these are smaller pieces, so if you had a very large piece of sedum you're trying to divide, the process would be the same, but I will tell you that if I had a big, huge piece of sedum that I was trying to divide during the very early spring months, maybe I would use a big shovel to do the divisions. But because these sedum are very tall and it's the end of July, I want to make sure that I'm not damaging the sedum, so I'm going to gently tug them apart. So either process would work. You can either tug them apart, you can use a large shovel to cut through, or you can even use something like a small hand pruning saw to cut through the roots. Any of those methods would work. And you can see here that the leaves on the sedum are different than the other sedum, but the process would be the same regardless of what kind of sedum you're trying to divide. And I'm trying to tug this one apart, and it is coming apart. And as long as each division has a top part with the green growth on it, as well as a bottom part with some root, then that's a very good division. Personally, I would not divide this down any more than that. And with this one here, let's see if we can divide it down one more time. And again, this one has roots on it. I like dividing my perennials down to pretty small pieces for the simple reason that then I know I don't need to divide this plant again for another 3 to 5 years. And I'm not going to divide this one down any further because it is a very good division. So we just turned that one plant into 3 plants, which is pretty sweet. It was a little bit of effort, but it cost us nothing. Here's the pruning saw I was telling you about. I use it quite a bit when I'm dividing plants. This saw is by Corona, but you can use whichever pruning saw you like. When I use something like a pruning saw or a shovel, I like to look at my plant and see, is there a good place where I can make a division? And I'm looking at this plant, and pretty much right here or right here would be a great place for me to make a division in one of those two spots. We just turned one plant into two. Very nice. The sedum here, you might decide is the size of sedum that you want to keep in your yard, but I'm happy to divide it in half just to have more of this plant around my landscape. I'm looking at the base again, and I feel the best place to divide would be right here if I'm going to use the pruning saw. If I'm going to divide it just by tugging it apart, it's going to naturally tug apart wherever it wants to. So let's first try tugging it apart. And that's not working, so we're going to go ahead and use the pruning saw. One thing I want to mention, with the other sedum that I divided, it divided a lot easier just by tugging it apart. This specific sedum is a little more woodier at the base, so the pruning saw is working better for me. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. This piece here has a small piece of root. It's not very large. Don't let that concern you. What's beautiful about sedum is that they are so easy to propagate. So this should be fine with the small piece of root, but let's just say there was no root on this plant. If you just took a piece of sedum with no root on it, stuck it in the ground, over a few weeks of time with water, that plant would root. So they are so easy to root from cuttings. So don't let that worry you when you're dividing your sedum. When it comes to transplanting your sedum, you just want to make sure that you dig a hole deep enough so that the roots are down below soil level. And you also want to make sure that this section right here, which is the crown of the plant, is above soil level. So all of this right here that's below the crown should be below soil level. The ground is pretty dry. Normally what you'd want to do is put some water in the hole before you plant your sedum. But since I'm only doing this for demonstration purposes, I'm not putting any water in the hole. You would want to make sure the roots are in beneath soil level, and then backfill, checking the base of your plant, making sure that the crown is not below soil level. Just push down. And then what I would do is I would make sure I give this a good drink of water right after planting, but also I would make sure that this is getting plenty of water for the next number of weeks, because you don't want your plant to be stressed out and dry out. So just make sure you're giving it enough water while the roots are establishing themselves again. It's always a beautiful thing when you can go shopping in your own yard for your own plants, take them, divide them, and turn one plant into multiple plants. I love that. I really push that a lot in my videos because it's a great way to save money. If you have any questions at all about dividing or propagating sedum, I'd love to hear from you. Please drop it down in the comment section below. I'll be making a lot more videos on how to divide perennials in your yard because I have a lot of perennials in my yard that need dividing. So it's a great time for me to be doing these type of videos to share with you. And even though spring or fall are a great time to be making these divisions, I'm doing them right now in the summer. It's not normally recommended, but it's recommended for me because I'm working on this flower bed right now. But don't worry, I will be giving these plants a lot of water when I get them planted out in this landscape. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.